In modern day hip hop, it really seems like now more than ever, you really only get one opportunity to make a good first impression, and if you somehow screw it up, it can cause irreparable damage to the rest of your career. And this ends up manifesting in many different ways. Say, for example, you're among the lucky few who's actually able to get a hit record that goes viral on either YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, or any other social media platform. I mean, it takes people years to even get to that point, and once you finally made it, it probably feels like you can relax a little bit. But unfortunately, what a lot of artists don't understand is the time between your first hit and your second hit is probably the most volatile time in your entire career. I mean, after all, if you can't follow up that first hit in a meaningful way, a lot of people are not going to give you a second thought. And I think this leads a lot of artists to really overthink what they should do next. I mean, after all, should you create the same sound that you got popular for in the first place? Should you try to experiment and do something different? Well, I feel like most artists end up picking the former because it's more simple and a lot of people don't want to hear anything new. I mean, after all, we all go to different artists for different things. We go to NLE Chopper for really aggressive, hyperactive music about gang violence. We go to Juice WRLD for emo rap, even though he didn't really make that through most of his career. We go to Playboi Carti to hear that vamp style. We go to Little Tracy to hear sad songs about drug addiction and heartbreak. And we go to Space Ghost Perp because we want to experience what it's like to have schizophrenia without actually having it. So when an artist decides to switch up their style, a lot of times people aren't very happy with it. I mean, look at NLE Choppa once again. He tried to go for that more spiritual sound with his later projects, and people didn't listen. Or how about Playboi Carti when he put out Whole Lotta Red? At first, a lot of people really didn't like the new direction that he was going in.
Feeling a decent 2 strong 5.
And this leads artists to fall into the box where they end up making the same song over and over and over again, like Polo G, DaBaby, Roddy Ricch, and many, many more.
What's your favorite song?
You did the box, right?
Fuck you, nigga.
And because of that, people eventually get tired of the sound and completely move on. However, I do feel like there is one artist who's really cracked the code when it comes to this whole conundrum, somebody who's been able to reinvent themselves time and time again, experiment with their music without going too far off of what made them popular, an artist who's fallen off not once, not twice, but 3 whole times and has somehow managed to come back bigger and better every single time. And on top of that, he's also been able to be popular in 3 different generations of the underground. He's a SoundCloud legend, he's an underground legend, and he's even a new age legend at this point. The man himself, Lucki. A name that means many different things to many different people. I mean, after all, some people probably know about him for working with Playboi Carti and ASAP Mob back in the day, or maybe you go a little bit farther back and you know about him because of the work that he did when he was living in Chicago, or maybe you're more of a new age fan who only first discovered him through the couple viral hits that he had on TikTok, or working with the new generation of rappers with people like Can, or even beefing with them with people like Destroy Lonely, or maybe you have absolutely no idea who this guy is whatsoever, and if that's the case, well, let me tell you about him when we look into the story of Lucki.
We get high, we get fat.
You dissed this.
Lucki Camel Jr., yes, his legal name actually is Lucki, was born May 30th, 1996 on the west side of Chicago, Illinois.
West side.
With him immediately being born into a pretty chaotic environment, with his mother being very young at the time that she had him, only being 19 years old, and his parents being split up before he was even conceived. And on top of that, he wasn't an only child either, with him having an older sister, meaning that it was kind of hard for a single mother to make ends meet. Money was pretty tight, and they grew up in kind of a shitty neighborhood somewhere in the hood of Chicago. He would nickname this place the Last Block, and I believe it was on the outskirts of the west side of Chicago, which seems to be a pretty bad neighborhood from what he explained. But to be fair, Comethazine said that he grew up in the murder capital of America, and then when I repeated that in my video, many people pointed out that it wasn't true. So sometimes rappers lie, but there's no real reason for Lucki to lie about this. And on top of the kind of rough surroundings that he had during his childhood, him and his mother's relationship was a little bit weird, with them not being that far apart in age. She would often treat him like a younger brother instead of raising him like a son, with her putting a lot of emotional baggage on him from a young age. And this would lead to issues later on in their relationship, but for right now, things weren't really as bad as they seemed, because it turns out that Lucki's father actually was in the picture, with them both co-parenting him in 2 different households, and his father being a little bit older and a bit more well-off meant that he was able to buy a pretty nice house in the suburbs, meaning that Lucki would often bounce back and forth between the 2 of them, spending 1 week with his mother and then 1 week with his father. father. And he also ended up going to school in his father's neighborhood, meaning that he basically got the best of both worlds, or at least that's the way that he explains it. And besides this kind of odd living arrangement, his childhood was pretty normal, with him growing up playing video games, watching the WWE on TV,
Come on out, you. Oh, there he is.
as well as playing football, with him actually having dreams of making it to the NFL. And it seems like he had at least a little bit of skill in this sport, because he actually ended up playing as a wide receiver on his middle school's football team, as well as playing in his freshman year on the high school team, before giving it up altogether to pursue music. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Before we talk about that, we have to talk about how he even got into music in the first place, and well, it mostly came through his father. It turns out that he was a massive fan of both Tupac and 50 Cent, with him showing Lucki a lot of their music in his early days, although Lucki did feel like his father's musical taste was a little bit closed off, with him not even allowing Lucki to listen to Biggie in the house because he was too much of a fan of Tupac. And when it came to his mother's side of things, she would mostly only listen to Prince, although at one point Lucki was able to find one of her old iPods which had a bunch of Future's old mixtapes downloaded on it, and he would immediately start listening to them and fell in love. However, his favorite artist of all time and his biggest inspiration during this time was actually Lil Wayne, with him at one point calling him the greatest rapper of all time, although he has called several different people that, so it probably doesn't really mean that much coming from him.
Nobody was better than Lil Wayne in his prime. Nobody. That's a fact. That's a fact. Nobody was better than Lil Wayne in his prime.
Is that your favorite rapper?
Yes. Nobody was better than Lil Wayne in his prime. I really think Chief Keef is the best rapper alive. I try not to believe it, but he is.
But while Lucki definitely was a really big fan of Lil Wayne's music, it was more so his persona that really drew him in, with him taking a lot of inspiration from the way that he dressed, with him first starting to wear skinny jeans after listening to Wayne, as well as designer sneakers. In fact, Lucki would become such a fan of designer sneakers that he would start collecting them, as well as a bunch of different posters of his favorite artists, which he would put all over his wall. And on top of that, watching Wayne perform would really put the idea of becoming a rapper into his head for the very first time, with him often looking at himself in the mirror and imagining what it would be like to perform in front of a stadium full of people, with him even beginning to write down raps in a journal when he was in the 7th grade, although at that point he was a little bit too shy to actually record or perform anything, so he would simply keep it to himself for the time being. However, once he got to high school, everything would change, because he would really start to broaden his musical taste, with him listening to acts like Odd Future, Chance the Rapper, and most importantly, Chief Keef, with him quickly becoming his favorite rapper of all time, with him even calling him the greatest to ever do it, which kind of clashes with what he said about Lil Wayne, but apparently Lil Wayne was only the greatest to ever do it in his prime, and I guess at that point in 2010, Lucki must have thought that Wayne wasn't really at the top of his game anymore, leaving room for a new artist to take his heart, and that was of course Chief Keef. As once again, Lucki was more drawn to the persona of Chief Keef than the actual music. In fact, he didn't even really like the music at first, but after he started to listen to it more and more, he really understood what Keef was doing, and he became a fan overnight. And similarly to Juice WRLD and Future, Chief Keef was really the one who inspired Lucki to start trying drugs, because he really liked the drugged out sound and the whole idea of being a teenager that was on Xanax, lean, and multiple other pills for some reason. Although at this point it was mostly only a dream, as after all, he was still on the football team, meaning that he had to stay in shape and he had to keep his studies up if he wanted to stay on the team. Although after he ended up going to an open mic at a local library, everything would change. Because before this point, all the artists that he looked up to were larger than life, and it really felt like he would never get the opportunity to meet any of them besides maybe a meet and greet at a show. But this open mic night that was put on by U Media became pretty infamous in the city, because a lot of big name rappers would actually attend, including Vic Mensa and more importantly Chance the Rapper. And seeing as how Lucki was already aware of Chance because he went to school with his younger brother, he actually had the confidence to approach him and talk to him, and after that they became fast friends. Now you gotta keep in mind this was way back in 2010 before Chance was really big. He only really hit his stride in 2013 when he ended up putting out Acid Rap, but he was gaining more and more fame by the day, with him actually getting the opportunity to meet the mayor of Chicago. And after Lucki seeing just how far Chance had come, he realized that he could also do it himself, and if he was friends with enough famous people, he might be able to become famous himself. And after that, all it would take was a little push from his high school friends, who would often listen to him freestyle at the lunchroom table, telling him that he should really take rapping seriously and he might actually be able to make it, as well as his dad also telling him to start at recording music, which finally gave Lucki the confidence to drop his first ever track in 2012. Although before that, he actually ended up getting into a little bit of trouble at school, with him getting kicked off of the football team and even dropping out in his junior year, which really seemed to piss his parents off. In fact, I think they were actually upset with him before he even dropped out, probably because he was hanging out with the wrong people and selling drugs, and it came to the point that his mother actually ended up kicking him out and telling him to go to his father's, with him getting upset and saying that he also hated his father. And the only reason we know about this is because he ended up airing it all out on his old Twitter, although eventually they seemed to come to some sort of terms because Lucki would live with his parents until the age of 19, so it didn't seem like that big of a deal, but it does go to show that his life was a little bit chaotic at the time. However, despite that, Lucki was still fully committed to becoming a rapper, with him dropping what we can assume was his first song ever on October 1st of 2012, which is called Pretty Girl Smoke Reggie. Now this track is interesting for a couple different reasons. First of all, he ended up slowing the beat down because apparently at the time he wasn't skilled enough to keep up with the tempo, but at the same time his vocals also seemed to get slowed down, which caused his voice to become a lot deeper than it usually is, which honestly should have sounded like shit, but despite that, for his first track ever, it's actually not all that bad. The other interesting thing about this song is that he ended up dropping it under the name of 97, which is a moniker that he only seemed to stick with for a couple days. It's either that or maybe he has older music than this song and he actually used that name for a couple months before he changed it over to Lucki X, but either way, this name was very short-lived. Now the Lucki X name, on the other hand, he ended up rolling with that for about 4 years before he ended up dropping off the X in early 2016, and the meaning behind this name is pretty simple. The dude's name is Lucki, and then X basically is the second syllable in Xanax, because at the time he was a very big fan of the drug, even though he wasn't actually taking it yet, and there's also a $sign on the X because he was a fan of ASAP Mob. I find it so funny how subtle both Lucki and Thousand Band Fonny were about including Xanax in their name, with them doing it in such an obtuse way that if it wasn't outright pointed out for you, you probably wouldn't even understand. And then Lil Xan came along in 2017 and was like, fuck subtlety, I'm just gonna name myself after the drug. I'm actually so surprised that we never got a Little Meth during the Soundcloud era, but honestly it's never too late. If somebody wants to name themselves that and then make a Breaking Bad inspired music video, that would probably go viral, and if you do, well, I came up with the idea. But hey man, this is YouTube. You can take people's ideas and not credit them. I mean, people do it all the time. It's really all good. On October 21st of that year, he ended up dropping his second ever song, which went by the name of Master Plan, which was also posted on a YouTube channel called Toyota Boys OG, which was basically this clique that Lucki was running with at the time. Now it's a little bit confusing because this wasn't actually a rap group, with most of the people being involved with it only being producers, and then there was a couple people that were in the group that weren't rappers, producers, or anything to do with music. They were simply Lucki's friends and they wanted to hang out with him and be part of a group. The most prevalent producer to come out of this group was Pluto Nash, which is somebody who worked heavily with Lucki throughout his entire career. There was also a couple rappers in the group that you might know of, with one of them being named Taylor Bennett, who went on to have a pretty successful career. And apparently in 2014, Adam Killa would also join this group, with him only recently talking about it on his TikTok, saying that he was friends with Lucki back in the day. And honestly, I wouldn't take anything that Adam Killa says at face value because he is known to be a liar. However, I have to give it to Adam on this one. He actually does have proof, because he ended up posting a music video in 2014 called Wanna Ball, where you can actually see Lucki in the background, so they did know each other at one point. However, it's not really clear what the extent of their relationship was. All I really know is that they're not cool nowadays, and some people have mentioned that apparently Lucki ended up slapping Adam on Instagram Live, although I haven't seen any proof of that. All I can say is that Lucki should consider himself, well, lucky, because I feel like if Adam thought he had anything to gain from the relationship that they had together, he would be stalking him the same way that he's stalking Blade and Young Lean, but that's a conversation for another day. For now, let's move on. As time went on, this group's name would change from Toyota Boys to Outsider Clique, with them actually putting out an entire collaboration mixtape together called Outsider Activities, which Lucki appears on several different times. After that, it doesn't seem like the group ended up putting out any more music together, although the group did exist in some capacity for a couple years after this point, changing their name over and over again before finally becoming defunct in 2017. Or maybe they still exist in some capacity under a different name and I'm not aware of it. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. We're talking about stuff that happened over a decade and a half ago, so not everything's going to be completely correct, but well, I'm trying my best. By the way, you guys can blame Jace for that whole PS2 server thing that I said in the last video. That's what he said on the No Jumper podcast. I repeated it. I'm never trusting a rapper again. Anyways, on to the next. After that project dropped in November 2012, 2013 would start off with Lucki getting a massive opportunity right out of the gate, because it just so happens that around the time that Lucki was really getting his foot in the door in the rap game, there was also a little known brand that was coming out of Chicago that went by the name of Elevator Magazine. At the time, they were running a blog as well as a YouTube channel where they would post up music videos for several upcoming talents in Chicago, including G Herbo as well as Fredo Santana. And it just so happened that Lucki knew a couple people who are currently interning at the company, and because of that, he was able to get the chance to talk to the founder of the magazine. And after a short conversation, Lucki was able to get the opportunity to post one of his own music videos on the channel, going by the name of Untouchable Lucki, which was actually the first music video that he ever shot. And with the channel starting to gain quite a bit of attention at the time, the music video would do very well, gaining him a lot of clout within the local Chicago scene, so much so that they actually ended up posting another music video for him only a couple months later for the track Everything Outside. And this is something that you're going to see time and time again when it comes to Lucki's career. His name is very appropriate because he always seems to be at the right place at the right time to really hop on a wave. I mean, after all, at this point in 2013, the Chicago scene was really starting to take off in a big way, and with Lucki now having a lot of attention on his music, he was able to do some small time shows where he would perform alongside people like Lil Durk. And it was through his connection to Chance that he was able to land a big time manager going by the name of Scott Venner, who was pretty instrumental in the early career of Chief Keef, only bringing Lucki and Keef one step closer together. And it seems like Scott really saw a lot in Lucki, seeing him as a very talented kid who really had a shot at making it big as long as he put the work in, with him going out of his way to call on all the connections that he had in the industry to really promote Lucki's first ever mixtape, which went by the name of Alternative Trap, which of course was heavily inspired by Chance's own project, Acid Rap. You see, before this project, Lucki was going with a more lyrical style, which was on par with what was popular in Chicago at the time, but after listening to what Chance did with Acid Rap, he decided that he also wanted to switch up his sound and go for something that sounded a lot more like cloud rap than, well, Logic or Eminem, which was a pretty big risk at the time, as after all, in the early 2010s, cloud rap definitely wasn't that popular of a style, with it really only gaining relevance on the internet, and most of the people who made it were looked at as jokes at the time. I mean, all the respect in the world to people like Young Lean and Lil B, but we all have to admit when they first came out of the gate, a lot of people looked at them as nothing more than meme rappers before finally finding respect for them later on in the decade. So for Lucki to run with this more niche internet style of music didn't really make a whole lot of sense at the time, although in the long run it definitely would pay off, with it gaining more and more popularity as the decade went on, and a lot of people looking at Lucki as an early pioneer in the genre. However, at the time, Lucki was pretty disappointed with the album's performance, saying that he had hopes that it would make it onto the Complex list of the top 50 albums of the year, which is completely absurd considering the fact that this is a random SoundCloud mixtape. And at the time, he was competing with people like Drake, Nicki Minaj, Tyga, Lil Wayne, you know, actual established rappers in the industry. So there was no way that anybody working at Complex was going to go out of their way to look into this niche little SoundCloud project in a genre that wasn't even popular at the time, but for some reason Lucki thought they would, and when they didn't, he was very disappointed. However, despite that, one of the tracks off the project called Count on Me actually ended up getting a music video that got retweeted by both Pharrell Williams and Justin Timberlake, which should have been two pretty big cosigns for Lucki, but at the time, he didn't care, with him going on to tell his manager that if it wasn't Lil Wayne, it wasn't good enough, which goes to show just how up his own ass he was at the time. And to make matters worse, this is really when his drug addiction kicked off, as after all, he was starting to make quite a bit of money off of doing shows. He felt comfortable and like he didn't really have to try too hard anymore, so he decided to pop a couple Xans. And after he realized that Xanax took away absolutely all of his anxiety and made it so he didn't care about what people thought anymore, he decided to start taking one every time that he would get on stage, which eventually led to him popping one every day, which then led to two every day, before he finally got to the level where he was taking 10 Xanax every single day and was completely lost in a fog 9 times out of 10. And of course, this would really start to piss his manager off, as after all, he would show up to the studio completely high out of his mind, not be able to record any music at all, and waste everybody's time. But despite that, they believed in him so heavily that they continued to work with him. I mean, after all, at the time he was only 17 years old. He was now making more money than he had ever made in his life before, and of course it made sense that he would dabble a little bit with drug use, but what they didn't realize at the time is that he was building up a pretty serious addiction that would only cause further problems later on in his career. However, at this point, things were only getting better and better for him, with him actually getting the chance to meet Chief Keef over the phone, with them doing a FaceTime call, as it turns out that he actually lived in the same neighborhood as one of Chief Keef's producers, going by the name of Young Chop. And once again, like I said, he just so happened to be at the right place at the right time and was able to form that connection with Keef. And on top of that, Keef would even give him a shout out on Twitter, as well as announcing that he was going to be the newest member of Glow Gang. Although I don't think that ever ended up going anywhere, but either way, getting a shout out from your all-time favorite rapper definitely had to feel good, and that would end off 2013. And surprisingly, 2014 would become an even bigger year for Lucki, with him dropping his second mixtape going by the name of Body High, a project that he mostly recorded under the influence of Xanax, but despite that, it did even better than the first, as it was actually this project that ended up catching the attention of some pretty prominent figures in the underground scene, including Ian Connor as well as ASAP Yams, who would both become pretty instrumental in his career in the following year. But for right now, all he really cared about was getting in the studio with Chief Keef, and he actually got the opportunity to do that sometime in late 2014, with the two of them creating a track together that unfortunately never ended up dropping, although he would get the chance to create a track with Chance the Rapper and Young Chop, which was called Stevie Wonder, with this entire interaction being recorded and posted on Elevator, and you can tell that Lucki was pretty psyched to be there at the time.
Hey, bro, G, me and this nigga was working. We was studying y'all niggas, G. This shit crazy as hell to us right now.
And once the track ended up coming out in late 2014, it would become a big hit as well, helping to build his fan base even more and leaving people in anticipation for his next big body of work, which of course would release in the following year. And as soon as 2015 started off, Lucki would get even more opportunities, with him actually getting the chance to meet Cole Bennett before Lyrical Lemonade really popped off. Apparently Cole gained a little bit of a reputation within Chicago for doing ciphers with upcoming rappers, and apparently Lucki heard about him through that, with the two connecting in real life, and Cole even paying him $100 to model a shirt for the Lyrical Lemonade website, as well as the two of them shooting a music video together, although for one reason or another it never ended up coming out for 7 whole years. Cole claims in the video that he completely forgot about it, but that doesn't really make sense when you consider the fact that it was completely filmed and edited. I mean, there was no reason not to put it out, but maybe there's something deeper to that, maybe there's not, who knows. Soon after that, Lucki would start the trend of dropping tracks under the Freewave name, with him starting off with Freewave 1, which got a music video on the Elevator channel, followed up by 6 more, before then shooting another music video for Freewave number 7, before finally releasing his third mixtape in mid-2015, which went by the name of X, 7 whole years before Ken Carson ended up dropping his own project by the same name, so needless to say that Lucki was very influential on that front. And this project is also an absolute favorite by many people in Lucki's fan base, with many people looking back on it as a classic and one of the best projects that he ever dropped, with the album including one track going by the name of Low Life, which became one of his biggest hits at the time. I would say that this was his breakthrough song, although some people claim that it was actually the previous project that broke him through, but either way, he still wasn't mainstream by any means, but he was growing in the underground. However, once again, Lucki wasn't satisfied with the project's performance, with him completely crashing out only a couple months later after getting high on Xanax and stealing somebody's wallet. The person ended up catching him in the act and tackling him, leading to a fight where Lucki beat the absolute crap out of the person, which of course led him to get arrested and get hit with an assault charge. And it was at this point that everybody that was around him started to realize that he wasn't getting the hint and that his drug addiction was only getting worse, leading many people to cut him off and many bridges to burn, with him even getting dropped by his manager around the time, which had to be a big blow to him and his ego, although unfortunately with him being on so many drugs at the time, he might have not even noticed. So with basically everything that he had built up in Chicago falling apart overnight, he decided to move to LA in hopes of making more connections and hopefully restart his career. And it's at this point that a lot of people would claim that he fell off for the first time, although I think a lot of this stuff really happened behind the scenes, and to the average viewer or Lucki, they probably had no idea any of this was happening. Not to mention, once he got to Los Angeles, his career only got bigger from there, so it's kind of hard to say that he fell off, at least yet, but we'll get there. As soon as he touched down, he would immediately connect with Ian Connor, who would then introduce him to Playboy Cardi, Cardi, who was another artist that he was working with heavily around the time. And this connection to Cardi would get him introduced to the other members of Splur Gang with people like Thousand Band Fani as well as Uno the Activist. And I'm sure he ended up meeting D Savage at one point or another. And on top of that, Playboi Carti was actually very helpful for Lucki in his career, with him actually teaching him how to rap over trap beats, which was something that he hadn't really done up to this point.
You wanna know something funny?
Yeah, what's up?
Like, being around Cardi taught me how to rap over trap beats. Remember, I used to make music like Chance the Rapper and them kinda, like, in that lane. Being around Cardi taught me how to rap over, like, up-tempo beats without talking about, like, selling, like, bricks.
On top of that, Cardi actually ended up taking him to a party where he got to meet A$AP Rocky and many other members of the A$AP mob, with Rocky letting him know that A$AP Yams absolutely loved his music, which was kind of hard to hear for Lucki, as after all, he never got the chance to meet Yams before he passed away. However, he at least got the opportunity to pay respects to Yams' legacy, because he actually ended up appearing in the Lamborghini High music video completely by accident. Basically, he ended up sleeping over at A$AP Rocky's house one night, and when he woke up, he realized that he was in the middle of a video shoot. And of course, not wanting to miss the opportunity to make history, he would immediately ask A$AP Rocky for a change of clothes and then appeared in the video. After that, in October 2015, Lucki would drop his next project called Free Wave 1, which is a little bit confusing. Don't get it mixed up with Free Wave 1 the song. Basically, this project was a compilation of all the priorly released Free Wave songs, as well as another song featuring Playboi Carti, which went by the name of Saucing, which was definitely a pretty dope cosign to get so early on, although at the time Playboi Carti was not as big as he would soon become in the following year. But none of that really matters, as we finally reached 2016, the year that many consider as the breakthrough year of SoundCloud rap. And I know there's going to be that one guy in the comments being a contrarian saying no, it actually started back in 2010, and yes, there were people making SoundCloud rap all the way back then, but it really started off in 2014, got bigger in 2015, and then finally became a massive phenomenon in 2016. And you would think that Lucki would be right on that wave. I mean, after all, he had already been making music for almost 4 years at this point. He was in LA, which would become one of the hubs of the scene, with No Jumper being located there, and it really felt like all the cards were in the right spot for Lucki to blow up in a big way, become as big as Playboi Carti, Lil Yachty, Lil Uzi Vert, Famous Dex, and many more. But unfortunately, just like many other artists from around this time, he really ended up tripping himself up right at the finish line. All he had to do was have another solid year in 2016, not go too hard in his drug addiction, not get lazy, not stop dropping music. But unfortunately, you can really only run away from your drug addiction for so long, and in 2016, it would finally catch up to him. However, at first, you wouldn't really be able to notice, with him starting off the year of 2016 by dropping the $sign off of his name before finally getting rid of the X altogether to rename himself to just Lucki, which was probably a good idea. I mean, Lucki X is a fine enough name, but the way that it's spelled is kind of confusing and honestly a little bit corny, and Lucki also agrees with me, so he ended up getting rid of it altogether. After that, in February, he would do a small interview on the Lyrical Lemonade channel, followed up by his next project in March, which he called Son of Sam, being named after a serial killer that terrorized New York. Now, this is kind of a weird name for a mixtape, with most people probably assuming he only called it that because he wanted to be edgy, but he actually did have a bit of a reasoning behind it, although it doesn't make all that much sense. Basically, the reason that David Berkowitz would gain this name, Son of Sam, is because after he got caught for killing several women all around New York, he would confess to it, but then would go on to say the only reason that he did was because his neighbor's dog was a demon named Sam, and he was the son of Sam. And of course, that story is completely ridiculous, and the only reason he ever told it in the first place is because he was trying to get off with an insanity plea in hopes of escaping prison time, but after he ended up getting hit with a life sentence, he would admit to another convict that all of that was bullshit. Just like most serial killers, David Berkowitz was an incel who got off on hurting women, but despite that, Lucki took the story at face value, with him claiming the reasoning that he called the project Son of Sam is because in the same way that Berkowitz was controlled by that dog, his demons were actually drugs and women who thought that he was too pretty to be alive or some shit.
It was that, and then I just felt like I had to give my fans some music, and I had hella dark songs I've been making. The Son of Sam, I was reading his letters and shit, like the letters, like people think I'm glorifying a serial killer. It's like it was fucking crazy, right? But his like really it's just the dog. Sam was David Berkowitz's neighbor, and you know David Berkowitz's neighbor, Sam named Carr. His name was Sam Carr. He had a dog that barked all night. The dog's name was Harvey. He fucking he was.
You dissed this.
In a way, it kind of makes sense if you're on drugs, but also I don't think I would compare myself to a weird, awkward serial killer who used to drink unpasteurized milk. Seriously, look it up, but anyways, yeah. His reasoning, not mine. It's his art. He can call it whatever he wants. After that, in the summer, he would go on to perform at the first ever Summer Smash alongside people like Ugly God, Famous Dex, and Warhol SS, before then dropping another project called Free Wave 2, which is honestly probably the most forgotten album in his entire discography, and for good reason. I mean, I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's honestly nothing special either. It's kind of just forgettable. After the summer was over, he ended up moving to New York to live with the woman that he was seeing at the time, although this definitely wasn't a good idea because at this point his drug addiction was getting so bad that he barely knew what was real and what wasn't, which meant that he was a pretty neglectful partner, with him being on drugs most of the time as well as hallucinating things that weren't even there, which would freak anybody out, let's be honest. And all this led up to him going on a massive bender where he didn't sleep for over 4 days, which of course led him to have a full-on psychotic break, and he had to be taken to a mental hospital soon after that. And in a way, this was actually a blessing because once he was in there, he was able to fully detox off of all of the drugs that he was taking and finally think about himself and his life in a sober way. On top of that, he would watch a lot of documentaries while he was in there, including one on Kurt Cobain, which really made him rethink everything that he was doing, as after all, he didn't want to end up dying young and wanted to live a long life. And these documentaries would also give him an idea for a retirement plan, as apparently after he's 35 years old, he wants to completely give up on music and start doing documentaries on artists, which I think is a super dope idea. But, you know, stay in your own lane, buddy. On top of that, he also ended up having his first son around this time, which meant that he really had to focus on his sobriety and mental health if he wanted to be present for his kid, which of course he did. So Lucki decided that it would be best if he took a full-on year break away from music, not dropping anything on Soundcloud or putting together any mixtapes, as after all, he only really made music under the influence of drugs, so doing it sober was going to be a little bit of a learning curve. And you would think this would be a death sentence for his career. I mean, after all, in my last video I talked about YB and Namir taking like a 4-month break between late 2018 and early 2019, and that completely killed his momentum. But when it came to Lucki, while he was definitely falling off during this period of time, his fan base was surprisingly loyal. I mean, after all, they had already stuck through with him for over 4 years at this point, and the type of music that he made was pretty niche, leading a lot of people to really relate to it, with several fans saying that they would listen to Lucki when they were in the worst stages of their own drug addiction, which meant that a lot of them actually wanted to see him do better, unlike YB and Namir, where basically he blew up off a fad and he had no real fan base to back him up. Which goes to show that blowing up immediately is good in the short term, but in the long term it usually leads to a lot of problems. However, Lucki was able to prove that if you really spend the time to build up your fan base and actually communicate with them, that they will wait for you to come back. And Lucki's rollout for his comeback project was actually pretty genius as well, because he basically ended up putting out a song every single month leading up to it to kind of test the waters and see if fans were still interested in that old style of music or if they were waiting for something new. In January 2017, he ended up dropping the first single off the project, which was called Leave With You, which was then followed up in February by another track that was called New to Me, as well as him hopping on a No Jumper interview that very same month to explain where he had been in the last year, as well as full on admitting to falling off, as well as talking about many of the mistakes that he had previously made in his career, which is a level of self-reflection that we don't often see in artists, because a lot of times they simply surround themselves with yes men, keep doing drugs, and never really take accountability for anything that they do. And it seems like his fans really appreciated this honesty, although a lot of the comments were poking fun at him for sounding like he was still on drugs, but apparently at this point he was fully sober. In March, he would go on to drop 2 more singles going by the name of Comfortable and No Walk, with the latter getting a music video on a channel called No Future, which now sits at over 2 million views, which is pretty impressive for an underground artist during that time. Unfortunately, with Lucki not being signed to a label, it's kinda hard to tell exactly how well he was doing number-wise, as after all, there's no way to really report sales data if you don't have a label behind you, but the numbers seem good on YouTube, they seem good on Spotify, and they seem good on SoundCloud. And with him no longer being addicted to Xanax and sleeping all day, he now had a lot more time to record music, which is something that he never really did before. He would mostly only record music when he was ready to put out a project and never saved anything in the vault, but during the time that he was on hiatus, he ended up recording over 100 songs that were ready to release at any time. And he would finish off the rollout for his project by dropping a small EP called Days Before a Storm, which only had 2 tracks on it, before finally putting out the project the following month. This project is called called Watch My Back and is once again one of the most beloved projects in his entire discography, right alongside X and alternative trap, with it having a good mix of his old style, which a lot of people told him he couldn't make anymore, as well as some new stuff showing that he was still growing as an artist even 5 years after he started rapping, which I know sounds kind of silly to say, but most artists end up getting into a certain style and they never really break away from it, so for Lucki to still be experimenting this late into his career was definitely pretty refreshing to see. And Lucki would continue to do promo for the project after it came out by appearing on Ham on Everything as well as Pigeons and Planes, and it seems like he had so much music in the vault that he actually decided to drop 2 small EPs called NYC and Extra Lucky, as well as hopping on a track with Lil Tracy called Percentage, I think. He would then finish off the year 2017 and start the year 2018 by dropping a couple music videos with Lone Wolf for tracks like Options, Incoming, and For Everybody. And if you don't know who Lone Wolf is, he's basically the guy who started that whole paper clipping effect. I know a lot of people don't really know any videographers outside of Cole Bennett, but there's definitely some pretty talented people out there if you really look. In April of 2018, Lucki would drop Days Before 2, as well as announcing a tour for the project, which I believe was his first ever official tour. I mean, he definitely was an opener for other people on their tours, but this was the first actual Lucki worldwide tour, or at least America-wide, which goes to show that he was finally taking his career seriously and trying to level it up, giving his fans a performance that they could really enjoy, as before this point, well, he was always high out of his mind, so it wasn't the best. It was also this year that he ended up signing a distribution deal with Empire Records. I know a lot of people seem to say that it happened in 2020, but if you look into the information on the songs that he was dropping in 2018, they all say Empire Records, so I believe that he signed it in 2018. He also ended up dropping a collab with Fawny on the track Second Place, showing the connection between the two was still pretty strong, even though him and Cardi didn't seem to be on the best of terms. Although at this point the two of them hadn't fallen out publicly, and it's not really even certain if they ended up falling out behind the scenes. I think the only reason that people believe that is because Lucki was working heavily with Uno and Fawny, and of course Fawny, Uno, and Cardi all have beef with each other. Although I think it's a lot more likely that the two of them simply grew apart after Lucki ended up going to the psych ward, and that's kind of backed up by the fact that he would later defend Cardi and actually take his side over Uno and Fawny. However, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. In 2019, Lucki would continue to go crazy, dropping multiple projects, including Hell Never Mattered, 3 Wave 3, which was a massive hit for him and is actually his best-selling commercial project to date. That project was then followed up by Extra Lucky Part 2, as well as Days Before 3, with him then starting to drop music videos on his own personal channel that went on to run up millions and millions of views. I mean, this guy was getting like 9 million views every time he dropped a music video. And this is also the year that Lucki would finally score a Montreality interview, as well as getting a small documentary about his life on Fader. And on top of all of that, he also ended up going on a second tour, so needless to say that 2019 was probably Lucki's biggest year ever. So you would think that 2020 would be even bigger, but unfortunately, as we already know, the pandemic ended up breaking out. And I'm not trying to say that Lucki fell off in 2020 by any means, it's more so that the entire music industry ended up going through a big shift in 2020 that would leave many of the biggest stars of the SoundCloud wave in the dust. However, results definitely vary depending who you are. People like Lil Xan ended up basically going ghost for a while, Little Skies, Ski Mask Slump God, but then you got people like Blueface who only got bigger during the pandemic, and then you got people like Thousand Band Fawny, Uno the Activist, and Lucki who kind of got cemented during this period. It's kind of funny to see how everything flipped on its head during this period, because everybody who was really popping off between 2017 and 2019 was now getting clowned on for falling off, while all of the artists that were overlooked during that period were now getting more respect. I mean, in 2017 you would definitely say that Smoke Perp was bigger than Lucki, but now in 2020 Smoke Perp was getting clowned and Lucki was getting respected. However, 2021 would be a pretty big challenge for any artist who came from the SoundCloud wave, because this is really when the new generation of the underground really started to pop off, meaning that there was a lot of younger artists coming into the game, and Lucki was kind of in a spot where he was either going to go down as an underground legend, kind of like Thousand Band Fawny, where he still drops music, he's respected, and everybody really cares about his contributions to the community as a whole, but he's not really getting any big time hits anytime soon. But Lucki played the game completely differently, and it's honestly kind of surprising to see that he was actually willing to work with the new generation of artists coming up in 2021, because all the way back in 2017 when he was on the No Jumper podcast, he would talk about how he didn't want to work with any upcoming artist out of Chicago at the time because he was already too established and already too big for that, but it seems like with the generational shift he realized that if he didn't find a new fan base he was was going to get left in the dust. So in 2021, he decided to jump on
Kids Take Over,
which I really see as a modern day No Jumper. It seems that a lot of the new kids don't really care about No Jumper anymore and instead will look to this channel if they want interviews from their favorite rappers. So it was a good idea for Lucki to hop on there and just pretend like he was part of this new wave, because a lot of these new kids didn't even realize that he had been making music for almost 7 years at this point. Soon after that, he would go on to drop another project called Wake Up Lucki, which was of course produced by the legendary producer himself, Filthy, who's known for working with people like Lil Uzi Vert as well as, well, Drake. And he also worked on a little known project called Whole Lot of Red, which would completely change the rap game as a whole when it dropped in late 2020, with it creating a whole new genre of music that sat somewhere between rage and hyperpop. I'm not really sure what you would call it. Some people would definitely call it rage, but I don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of that because people get very touchy about it. But either way, it was something that was kind of close to the style of music that Lucki was making at the time, and because of that, his music only became more popular. And this would all reach a head in 2022 when he ended up dropping a song that went by the name of Super Eurus that would become very popular on TikTok, with him quickly gaining a whole new fan base of people that would have never even thought of listening to Lucki prior to this. And a lot of people describe his new fan base as suburban, which I think is kind of a silly title considering that all rap fans are suburban. I mean, don't get me wrong, rap music is primarily black culture, but 90% of people that listen to it are definitely white kids, I'm sorry to say. So I'm not really sure why people are so upset that he was starting to gain a white fan base because he already probably had one. But I have heard many people describe his new fan base as very corny, with them making jokes about how he got fat because after he stopped doing Xanax, he decided to start sipping lean, which is kind of sad to see, as after all in 2017 he was like fully sober. However, I do understand that life is not a movie and addiction is a never-ending struggle that's going to follow you throughout your entire life, so it does make sense that he ended up relapsing onto another drug, although he definitely doesn't seem very healthy. In a weird way, Lucki is kind of like the original Dave Blunts, because a lot of people got into him because they saw him getting fat and started to worry about his health, although once Dave Blunts came out and was like 600 pounds, people had somebody new to focus on. However, despite how corny people find Lucki's new fan base or how many jokes are being made at his expense, I would say that 2022 really started off a golden age for Lucki, with him seemingly popping off in the news every other day for beefing with somebody or playing a big show or putting out a single or getting a cosign from a big artist. I mean, just in the last 3 years, he ended up performing at Rolling Loud on 2 different occasions, which is something that he never did at the height of his SoundCloud fame. On top of that, he also ended up performing at Summer Smash again in 2023, as well as dropping songs with both Lil Yachty and Can Can, which of course only got more attention on him. On top of that, he also did a Nardwuar interview. He ended up returning to Montreal to do a second interview. He got on an Aiden Ross live stream. He also got a second big hit on TikTok called New Drank, as well as doing several big shows all over the country. On top of that, he also got a cosign from Drake, got another music video on Lyrical Lemonade for his track Coincidence, as well as getting that prior Lyrical Lemonade video released from 7 years ago. And on top of that, he's released so many albums that I can't even name them all, so needless to say that Lucki is doing better than ever before. And honestly, it's really nice to see one of these OG SoundCloud rappers not burn out and become a complete weirdo. I mean, hell, look at people like Space Ghost Perp or Ruben Slick. I mean, they're definitely very influential and legendary in their own right, but after years of doing drugs and working full-time off of music, they've completely lost their minds and are now mostly known for crashing out and doing schizophrenic shit. And that's definitely where Lucki could have ended up if he kept doing drugs the way that he was doing in 2017, but instead, he cleaned himself up, he self-reflected, he tapped back in with the fans that made him popular in the first place, and eventually he ended up getting his due, which is just honestly awesome to see. And honestly, it's not just him. We've also seen D Savage and Uno the Activist come back in a big way, and it finally seems like that old tired narrative of the SoundCloud rapper who came up in 2015, peaked in 2017, and was completely burnt out by 2019 is finally coming to an end. The internet is a brand new place in the post-COVID world, and it seems like people are finally getting a second chance to do everything that they should have at the height of their career, and honestly, I'm here for it. Next up, I want to see Little Skies come back. I want to see Made in Tokyo have a huge comeback. I want to see a little... Okay, no, I don't want to see a Little Pump, but yeah, that's the story of Lucki, and overall a pretty positive one. Although, to be fair, I did leave a little bit out about his recent career, because there is another reason that many people know Lucki, and that's for his beefs with many big name rappers like Playboi Carti, Destroy Lonely, and many more. Okay, maybe not that many more, and I promise you that I want to include all of that in this video, but but unfortunately I felt like there was no way that I could squeeze it all in and actually do it justice. So instead I want to do another video where I talk about all the beefs of Lucki that he's had over his entire career. I know of 4 right now, but there might be a couple more that I haven't heard of before. So if you know of any unknown beefs of Lucki, make sure to leave them in the comments below. My bad for giving you guys blue balls on this one, but I promise it will be worth it in the long run. And with all that said, I will now be retiring Knife Gang. We're no longer leaving knife emojis in the comments below. The new thing is going to be delete this. I want everybody to comment delete this on all of my videos. It will confuse all the people who don't wait until the end, and on top of that, I just think it's pretty funny. So yeah, what's up, delete this gang? That's the new gang, that's the new generation, that's the new everything. Twisted World out. I will see you in the next one, which will be the many beasts of Lucki. Hopefully, I don't know, I got ADHD and I always change my mind on everything, but no matter what, you guys are going to get that Black Crave video. I'm telling you, it's already half written. I just got to write the rest, but I'm trying to do my best on that one for the fans. Anyways, peace out. See you in the next one. Bye.